Okay, so the time has finally come to do the unboxing and analysis video of this reel right here. Now this reel has actually been available on AliExpress for a few months now, and a lot of you guys have been sending me messages and emails asking me my thoughts on it and wondering whether I was going to buy one to do a review, and my answer has always been no. And we'll go more into the reasons why later on, but luckily the kind people over at NACO Fishing contacted me a few weeks ago and offered to send me one to do a review on, so you guys can thank them. And in fact, I'm gonna leave a link directly to their shop where you can purchase this reel pinned in the comments section. So let's get to it. Now, first of all, over on AliExpress, I believe this reel is called a Kingfisher, but since I don't see Kingfisher anywhere on this box, I'm just gonna call this thing the Flight Feather. And this reel is probably gonna be one of the most unforgettable reels you'll ever see in your life, and it is potentially on paper the pinnacle of Chinese bait finesse reels, at least at the moment. So it comes with a nice little color, high quality little pamphlet. Okay, looks like the reel comes in this velvet bag, and it's got lettering, and that's it. Alright, so let me pull this thing out, make sure I got it right side up. Yep, I do. Boom! Oh my god, look at this thing. Now, I'm sure you saw in the thumbnail what it looked like, but yeah, I was right. This is probably going to be one of the most unforgettable bait casters that you're ever going to see in your life. I mean, just look at it. Look at that pointy top piece right there. Alright, very, very smooth for a Chinese bait finesse reel. I'm gonna let you guys take it all in. What the? Yep. That is the main gear there. Wow. So yeah, I'm gonna take quite a few minutes to examine this reel, take some notes, and damn, look at it. Alright guys, I'll be right back. So the very first thing we're going to talk about, of course, is going to be this radically insane paint scheme. Now, let me know in the comments, do you love this paint scheme? Do you think it's cool and cutting edge? Or do you hate it and you think the colors clash too much and they should have just stuck with more neutral colors? Or do you not care as long as the reel is a great performer? Are you one of those guys? But the paint scheme on the Flight Feather is wholly inspired by the Kingfisher bird. So whoever came up with this paint scheme must really be obsessed with the Kingfisher. So you have this dark blue at the base of the reel, and it kind of gradually transitions into light blue, and then on the top of the frame you have dark blue that transitions into orange, and then of course you have these white dots or speckles literally all over the reel. It looks kind of messy to me, but all these colors and even the speckles are found on the Kingfisher. And one thing I wanted to point out was that I compared my particular reel to pictures of a couple of other Flight Feathers, and these white speckles are actually, I guess you would consider them custom, because no two reels have the same exact speckle pattern. So I guess that makes this flight feather a reel with a custom paint job. Now personally, this color scheme is not to my taste. It's one of the main reasons why I did not buy this reel when it first came out. And I personally think that whoever makes this reel should come out with a reel with more, I guess, natural or neutral colors, and I think it would sell better. But yeah, that's the story on the radical paint scheme of the flight feather. So now it's time to bite the bullet and go ahead and talk about the price of the flight feather. Now, on AliExpress, this reel costs a little over $190. So this reel, along with the KASTKING Kestrel Elite, represent two of the most expensive bait casters ever for sale on AliExpress that are Chinese market. But when you factor in that AliExpress is now charging a 10% sales tax, this $190 reel suddenly becomes $210. So that's the second reason why I didn't want to buy this reel. But check this out. The guys over at NACO Fishing have this reel for sale for only $170. So that's like $40 cheaper than getting it on AliExpress, and that's pretty insane because reels don't come to America and sell for cheaper than they do in China. So once again, if you guys want to buy this reel, check out the link in the pinned comment. It'll take you straight to NACO Fishing's website. I advise you to browse around. Looks like they have good deals on tungsten weights, and if you're a Jika rig guy like I am, they have a ton of Jika rig setups. So now that we've established that the flight feather is significantly more expensive than your average bait caster coming out of China, let me show you guys what you're going to get for your money. Now the first thing is that the flight feather is going to have a magnesium frame, and according to the literature, the magnesium, I guess, is a denser, higher grade magnesium. Now I assume that the side plates are going to be carbon fiber. They say that the flight feather has 11+1 bearings, so I think that's equal to the rival KASTKING Kestrel Elite. So that means you're going to have 2 bearings per knob. Now the flight feather is going to be sporting the fashionable tapered cone-shaped line guide that's bigger at the entrance and tapers off to a narrower exit, and that's supposed to reduce line friction during the cast. Now it's got your obligatory carbon fiber handle, which I believe comes in at about 84 to 85 millimeters. And these knobs, let's check these out. They are rubber coated, and the rubber is very soft and grippy, but you see they have these little, I guess, holes that show, I guess, underneath the rubber is blue. So I think that's another design taken from the Kingfisher, but these knobs are very, very comfortable and very, very grippy. Now, I do think that dirt will get into these holes pretty easily, but for right now they feel really, really good. You got your stylish silver knob end caps. So these knobs and these end caps pretty much scream Shimano to me, and we'll go more into that here in just a second. But let's not forget this little clear plastic window that shows you the gear inside, and I believe if you unscrew this, you probably can take that off and add some grease to your gears if you need to. But pretty much the rest of the features and technology of this reel is going to lie in this right here, and we'll go over that here in just a moment. Now, based on the thumb bar shape as well as the drag star shape, I believe this reel is probably made in the same factory as the Okuma Hakai, and that means this reel is solid. It's very well built. I'm squeezing it, I'm shaking it, and there's no kind of noises, no creaks, no ticks, no clacks. The knob tolerance is excellent. There's no in and out or up and down play. The thumb bar is smooth, operating, feels good, no mush or slop. So basically this reel feels just as well built as the Kestrel Elite, but where the Flight Feather surpasses the Kestrel is in a couple areas. Now the first one is when you turn the handle, this Flight Feather is ridiculously smooth. And I'm not talking just for, you know, a Chinese AliExpress reel. I'm talking when you compare it with pretty much any reel out of the market. It's very buttery smooth, but tight and rigid at the same time. And it very much reminds me of a combination of Shimano and LEWS. So the Flight Feather is noticeably smoother than the Kestrel Elite, which is the main competitor. And I attribute that to the fact that these gears, if you can see them, look pretty much like micro gears from Shimano. So yes, it looks like micro gears finally come to China. But yeah, the reel is glassy, smooth, but it's got that Shimano buttery feeling. But let me show you where else this Flight Feather has an advantage over the Kestrel Elite. And that's going to be in its drag star. Now the drag star is made of probably carbon or graphite or some kind of a non-metal material. And you can see the shape, it's very stylish. But when you're clicking the drag star, turning it, the clicks are very precise. And it feels sturdier and more refined than the drag star on the Kestrel Elite. And that was one of the areas that I thought needed improvement in the Kestrel Elite, but the one on the Flight Feather feels great. Now it's time to go over a few things that this reel is lacking. Now the first thing is going to be a clicking spool tension. Now the spool tension is made of metal. You can see it's got that little F there, I guess for Flight Feather. That probably should have been white, but it doesn't click. But the good news is it's got a very smooth, precise turn to it, and it takes a little bit of effort, so there won't be any kind of I guess misadjustments if you happen to just bump the spool tension knob. Now let's talk about the brake dial. Now you can see it's orange, it's got some numbers, but the brake dial doesn't click, and it is kind of hard to turn, but it is very solid and smooth feeling. And lastly, I know this is going to be a disappointment for a lot of you guys, but the Flight Feather does not have a clicking drag. So yeah, very strange that they didn't include that, but it is what it is. But overall, yeah, this reel has mainstream build quality and smoothness, and personally the build quality alone for the price is perfectly acceptable. So now it's time to quickly go over the size of the Flight Feather before we get into the good stuff. Now, when I first took the Flight Feather and mounted it on a rod and palmed it, the first thing that came to mind was that this feels almost exactly just like this reel, the 2016 Shimano ALDEBARAN BFS. The only difference is that the Flight Feather palms a little bit longer, but it palms lower as well. But they feel so similar because I'm pretty sure the 2016 ALDEBARAN was the inspiration for the Flight Feather. You got your very pointy beak-like nose piece. If you look on the side, very similar profiles. You can definitely see that the Flight Feather is lower, but it's also got a smaller palm side plate. So yeah, the Flight Feather feels lower, but it's also a little bit longer as far as length goes. So here's another comparison. So if you own a 2016 ALDEBARAN BFS and you love the way it palms, then you're going to like the way the flight feather palms. Okay, so it's time to quickly get a weight on this flight feather, and despite the relatively large size of this reel as compared to its competition, they are claiming it's supposed to weigh only 4.4 ounces. So the only other reel that's claiming that is going to be one of its main competitors, the Kestrel Elite, and you can definitely see there is a size difference between the two, but somehow they're supposed to weigh the same. So first we're going to reweigh the Kestrel Elite, coming in at just under 4.5 ounces at 4.49, and let's see what the flight feather weighs. Whoa. So despite being a bigger reel, the flight feather is just fractionally lighter at 4.47. So yes, they did hit their mark of 4.4 ounces. So that's pretty incredible considering just how much material is on this reel. So now let's get to this spool. Alright, so the spool scales out and it's time to reveal the flight feather's best party trick, and that of course is going to be its spool. So since this is designed like a 16 ALDEBARAN, the latch should be right here, and alright, so you slide the side plate down, and first of all let's take a look at these brakes. Now these are mag-track style brakes, which are static, so the magnets don't move. There's no moving pieces on the spool, and this is another reason why I did not want to buy the flight feather at first. But they say that the spool bearings are supposed to be high speed, and thank God they're stainless steel instead of cheap hybrid ceramics. Okay, so there's the brakes, and let's pull the spool out. So you can see they've installed these metal spacers in the frame, and let's take a look at this spool. Alright, so it's obviously blue, and it's pretty standard, I guess, depth for a bait finesse spool, but you can see that it is concave in the middle, so it does hold a little bit more line. Short spool shaft. The magnetic plate is orange, which is a nice touch. But let me give you some information on this spool. Now, the spool is only 30 millimeters in diameter. They say that the spindle, or I guess the spool shaft, is not steel, not aluminum, but titanium. So very exotic, expensive material for the spool shaft. They say this spool can spin in excess of 40,000 RPM. And I think we've heard that before with the DAIWA SSRTW. The optimum lure range they say is 1 to 5 grams. And this spool is supposed to weigh only 3.4 grams without its bearing. And you heard me correctly, 3.4 grams without its relatively small spool bearing. So if that's true, this spool is the lightest spool of any stock bait finesse reel in history by a long shot. I mean, it's even lighter than a lot of aftermarket spools, but that's why we have the scale out. We're going to find out if that's true. Alright, so I brought out the competitor Kestrel Elite spool. With the spool bearing, you're looking at 5.4 grams. Now without the spool bearing, This Kestra Elite previously set the standard at 4.5 grams. Okay, so the flight feather spool, holy shit, 4.18 grams with the bearing. Alright, so if you guys didn't know already, Paul over at Fishing Discoveries bought one of these reels a couple of months ago, and he already did a video and a test. I suggest you go check that video out. But if I recall, on his particular spool, it did look like you were able to remove the spool pin. But on mine, it looks like it is removable, hopefully. And yeah, let's see if I can get that off and get a true rotational mass. Okay, so I was actually able to successfully remove the spool pin, but unfortunately, just like Paul's reel over at Fishing Discoveries, you cannot take this bearing off. And that's because they have designed this little raised ridge onto the spool shaft that prevents you from sliding the bearing off. So this bearing that you get, you are stuck with it. There's no upgrading. And that's kind of a disappointment and a strange design, really. But fortunately, there is literally no grease on the spool shaft, and this bearing seems to spin pretty freely. But another thing is that this bearing is pretty much locked in place on that spool shaft. So it's very much like Shimano Silent Tune, where they want to keep the bearing locked and not moving during the cast. But I'm gonna go ahead and just assume they are correct with the claim that this spool is about 3.4 to 3.5 grams without the bearing. So once again, this is leading all bait finesse reels by far as stock spool weight, with the closest runner-up being the KASTKING Kestra Elite, coming in at about a gram heavier. So with this spool weight, you can see that the philosophy for the Chinese is pretty much the opposite of the Japanese. Now the Japanese will give you small incremental spool weight losses with each new generation of reel, but as you can see with the Chinese, they are taking no prisoners. They are lopping off spool weights like 1 gram at a time. And it makes you wonder, where are we gonna go from here? Because like I said before, I think there's only maybe 1 or 2 or 3 aftermarket spools that are even lighter than this. But let me share with you guys some of the claims that they have made about the casting performance of the flight feather. Now they're claiming this reel can cast up to 1/50th of an ounce, so that's about half a gram. And they're also claiming that this reel can cast a 1 gram lure 20 meters. So 20 meters equates to about 65.5 feet. Now, I don't see any kind of video evidence of them actually doing this, and if they did, I wonder what kind of 1 gram lure they used. More than likely a small metal trout spoon that cut to the air really good. But just for context, the farthest I've ever casted a 1 gram trout magnet several years ago was just under 50 feet. So if this thing can actually cast a trout magnet 65 feet, that's going to be a game changer. But of course, we're going to have to test that out. Okay, so I'm going to go over one more thing real quick before I give you my final initial thoughts on this flight feather. This reel is going to be offered in 2 gear ratios. There's a 7.3 to 1, and Neko Shop actually sent me the 8.2 to 1, and you can tell because there's like a ghost 8.2 imprinted on the nut retainer right there. And it's not really anywhere else on the reel. In fact, there's no writing or badging anywhere on the reel. And I guess the guy didn't want to spoil his Kingfisher paint scheme by adding a bunch of letters and numbers. But anyway, so far I am pretty impressed with the flight feather. Like I said, the build quality is definitely mainstream. The smoothness is definitely above mainstream. And then when you couple it with the fact that the reel is so light, very comfortable to palm, and it's got a class leading spool weight by far over its nearest competitor, which is really impressive considering that there are no holes drilled into the spool. This reel on paper sounds like it's going to be a killer. But just because it kills on paper doesn't mean it's going to kill out on the water. So of course I'm going to take it out on the water and cast around some normal BFS lures, see what it's about, and then I'm going to really test its limits, as I think I'm going to include this reel in the BFS Maggot Casting Challenge, along with the High Boat Rise Air and my modified ALDEBARAN BFS. So yeah, once again, if you are impressed with what you've seen so far with the Flight Feather, go to the link pinned in my comment section at the very top and go purchase one for even cheaper than you can get it from on AliExpress. Alright guys, thanks a lot.